I'm not even really sure what a concept like stealing the news could possibly mean. It's a Woody Allen kind of concept. I do know that there were often in the lore of newspapers back in the days when it was reporting was a fairly honest occupation. There were rivalries to get scoops. You could argue that stealing somebody's leads, for example, or someone's notebooks was stealing the news if they were hot after a scoop. But that's not really what I have in mind. I'm not really trying to describe that. It's more like a concept of um, meaninglessness. Not telling people something might be one way of interpreting the phrase. Gregory Carl was a tactician in the Pittsburgh Catholic scene. He used to talk of forces impinging on a persona's experience. The persona is a deaf person who didn't finish college until late in life. I got the help of a deaf girl who was diagnosed as having Down syndrome. I don't know exactly if that's exactly what she had. I was given diagnoses too that were fraudulent political diagnoses intending to harm me and silence me. The impingers came up with ways of silencing me that involved terrorism towards innocent people in my surroundings. Like when I talked about Tupac with somebody, they went after a girl named Melina Shaykat. And it was like the whole point of murdering her was to make it clear that the military has ways of making you regret talking about things. One of the things we're dealing with in the here and now, it's depressing. It's the way that Donald Trump tore down the east wing of the White House. What's to stop him from tearing down the statue of Martin Luther King? Saying it's getting even for tearing down the statues of Robert E. Lee. But really, the person who tore down the legacy of Martin Luther King was Barack Obama. Barack Obama has made it embarrassing for Black people who make up what's left of the effort to build a beloved community with social support, opposition to mindlessness, through public education, the give and take of understanding things. Was replaced with a Bush type of get a piece of the action scene. I didn't pay much attention to Obama, but I'm told that he was into drone wars, that he dropped more bombs than any other president. I know that he was a really psychotic bully when it came to me. And if you want to know what he was involved in when it came to me, you can look at my period pieces, my writing. And it was just inevitable that somebody who displaced and ruined Martin Luther King's legacy would start going after the children of political dissent, and all the other weird madness of terrible persecution. And there's a problem of respecting property in our society. We see films of settlers, they just walk into Palestinians' houses and steal anything they want to find, just push the people away, and there's no laws to stop it. Becker used to do that. He used to come into my house and take my coin collection. Supposedly, the whole FBI mania situation is to persecute justifiably anyone who had sex out of wedlock. In other words, the whole idea that leftist sensibilities were somehow going to be diplomatic towards the world was subverted by their sexual liberation. I was too young to understand that stuff. I was just a child when they were doing it. So they got away with torturing me. I'm really not a politician. That's obvious. It's not because no one would vote for me. It's choice. I wouldn't want to elect a talented baker to the office of plumber. It's just not me to be that. I'm more of a researcher and a detective. And of course, the people who came after me came gunning for me, who set me up, who gave me a role that my asserting my agency as a half-educated deaf man who wrote things like poetry and expressed some idealism in editorials, said that they were detectives too. They weren't. Let's disabuse ourselves of this claim by the sandbaggers. The British allegiance in media, for example, claim they're going to enforce a narrative with the blessings of Martin Luther King and so on, because they had Dexter King's blessing. He was intellectual properties management, hair splitter for economic legalities. In other words, he was the estate manager of his father's legacy. And they made the whole issue intellectual property. That's where they got the concept that started getting celebrated in our media of establishing the narrative, that phrase. It wasn't finding out what was going on. It wasn't investigating details. It wasn't being detectives. It was making the whole media pole into a political albatross of storytelling. And you get relative truthers like Abdul, Eisenstadt, whose reality, mine or yours, and so on. The ability to negotiate, forget about it. And that's what really tore down the meaning of Martin Luther King's life, because he was an open-minded, sensible man. He wasn't particularly a detective. They gaslit him and scared him. There's a phrase, send him a message. It came from George Wallace, segregationist. That meant gaslight somebody. Of course, Obama and the people he works with, like Oliver Stone, they conveniently get loyalties by saying he's the black honorary figure. But there's likely to be Hollywood Jews as they are to be anything, or Italians in a Spike Lee movie. So Jeannie taught me sign language. Made it possible for me to go to college and learn some things. And I detected some things and had to suffer through 2 years of homelessness because they were force feeding me drugs and to batter me by them so that they could attack my name, my reputation, put on their storyline. But don't be fooled that these people are detectives. For example, they don't want the truth about the people they're advocating for seen and heard. They look for ways to sort of hotwire around the truth about the people who they're advocating for. That's one very big problem with British media, all the way up to and including Owen Jones. And they certainly don't want their ghoulishness to be identified as the sort of ghoulishness that is bearing children, running over them with bulldozers, which is also true about them. That's very true about them. Like Peter Gabriel had this rapid eye movement thing where he was selling this storyline. We demand the right to frame you for rape. And they said, we'll keep trying it, using trauma, torture, neurology, seizures, lies, virginity played a big role in their hypnography. And what they proved was that I had been kidnapped and gassed by murderers in a stolen car when I was just a child. And they banged the table and said, see, he was a rapist. I escaped the car by climbing out into the snow and running far from home, alone. And Bill Clinton staked his name and reputation on claiming that a child being kidnapped and tortured that way was evidence of date rape. That's not detective work. That's a very strange misuse of psychiatric neurology, neurohypnosis of some kind, because they had amnesia sealed shut in the neuroplastic semicoma and said, we'll pry it open and see what's in there, like as though it was a buried treasure chest. And Jeannie and I have always had to deal with people robbing us of small things that we treasured and so on. Pittsburgh is the kind of place where if people know you're deaf, they'll follow you to the ATM. Stand behind you, follow you away, and grab what you have when you're out of sight of the cameras. And they'll do it because they know you're vulnerable because you're deaf. And the problem with Seattle, Washington is that they're partners in that kind of operation. They literally understand those issues. And they say, come on and join our team. Then when you come on to join their team, they say, out of the frying pan and into the fire, sucker, and get right to work doing what Pittsburgh was doing. And the only rivalry is whether they do it better and more viciously. So there's no detective work going on in any of this stuff. Neither King, they call themselves King County. And their idea of being Martin Luther King, I kid you not. The idea of the authorities. Now let's make this clear so this is personal. Bruce Harrell, Sawant, Pramila Jayapal, Sharon Santos, these people renamed King after King County was Rufus King. They renamed it after Martin Luther King. And their idea of being Martin Luther King is to rip or murder Shannon Harps, a bystander from the Sierra Club, over a penny. That's their idea. They think that that's nonviolence. You ask them, is that nonviolence? And they say, I think so. And it was just a matter of time when Malcolm X poseurs whooped the duped for Lloyd Austin and George Bush. The hate produced justified Israel's extermination of Gaza. It's not that we don't need Martin Luther King's heritage and legacy. It's just that the wrong message was drawn from how they ended up silencing him, which was through cruelty and assassination and bigotry and strategy. Because in the letters of Gail Burston, they talk openly about Martin Luther King murdering him and why. Why would a police administrator like Garland Nixon subvert the existence of such evidence? They tried to get it destroyed. The British intelligence media tried to put it through the paper shredder. The man was homeless for 2 years, defending my right to access the newsreels, news microphone microfiches, and it took 2 years more for them to even bother to send them to me. Why would they refuse to look at such information? Try to destroy it. It's just as bad as tearing down his statue with the ballroom bulldozers. His life had meaning, but the way it happened is police duty to investigate. People like Garland Nixon are not detectives, not in the meaningful sense of the word. These were the people who said that a child kidnapped, terrorized, and gassed on a freezing cold day in Eastminster District of Pittsburgh was evidence of a date rape that never happened. I mean, it's the most absurd idea of detective work that I think has ever been concocted by propagandists. It's a Hollywood farce. And it absorbed the talents and attentions of Václav Havel when he was around, the Jeffin artist magnates. So Barack Obama used that whole story, that whole song and dance, and the way they've tortured me and the Parkinson's and terrorized me as a senior citizen, 65 years old, and they're still terrorizing me, gaslighting me, sending me a message about their proclivity for fatal cruelty. As an alternative to allowing Jeannie and I to team up safely and relatively productively as friends in Pittsburgh, despite my having taken the time and gone to the trouble of advising the police about the evidence in King's murder that surfaced in my detective work, my evaluation of some Israeli letters. We still just wanted to be relatively quiet, happy, deaf people who are involved in the community and volunteering at Goodwill, and me writing my poetry, visiting coffee shops. I mean, they've turned home surveillance into a parochial peep show by contracting attack prostitutes and chemically castrating a deaf man as part of a production system that they admit in their texts is impinged on what they call personas experience. They say we're just things, and they get away with this. Things are like the East Wing of the White House was a very precious cluster of things, and they just raised them. And the people in Gaza were very precious Palestinian souls, and they just raised them. So they don't even have respect for things, much less people. And they can't tell them apart. And you're supposed to cheer as what John Rawls called the closest continuer of Martin Luther King in the form of Barack Obama. And Kamala Harris, maybe that's less controversial. She's the one who talked about how lethal our weapons were. Martin Luther King gave his pistol to the police department in Montgomery, I believe. He said, I want no part of this anymore. Here, take my piece of the action. I don't want it. It's too corrupting. And Kamala Harris is his closest continuer. I'm not trying to be preachy. I'm trying to show that administrative authority doesn't have any maturity left, that they would terrorize as an act of policy in a uniform, organized, and deliberate way. A deaf man who has multiple infirmities is disturbing. It's very disturbing. And in the sense that Martin Luther King's voyage led to such a disturbing end in Memphis, Barack Obama is the closest continuer in terms of surviving in the mysterious fog of that disturbing atmosphere. Barack Obama, upon whom be peace, as the Muslims say. He won't reciprocate, but I mean it. Upon whom be peace. And they're the ones who celebrate his means of death by adopting the message and the meaning behind the assessment made of the situation by the killers. That, in my opinion, humble opinion, is wrong. That's not just tearing down the statue, that's erasing the meaning of his life. Martin Luther King's life should be celebrated. But one of the ways you celebrate a man's life is by properly investigating the circumstances of his death when they're suspicious. We haven't given that courtesy to JFK either. It's very sad to be an American who's aware of these things because of what it meant for these men and what it means for us as a society. We need mature administrative values. We don't have them. It's very sad.